In kind of getting ready for this, I was thinking about, the history of what I've been involved with in Subarus. And one of the things that dawned on me, and this is relevant to you actually,
Mhm.
is that Subaru, I think, is unique. Like one of the things that makes it unique is that it's a car and a platform that people get attached to, and that's not unusual. But what's interesting is people end up loving their Subarus so much that whatever their platform is, they decide, okay, I want to do this. And I'm not going to go out and not going to find some other car and try and turn it and use it to do
Mhm.
this. I'm going to take my Subaru and I'm going to do this. So
Well, I think I'm actually the very best example of that because of my current build, which is a 2004 Forester XT.
yeah,
Comes from the factory as a bit of a grocery getter wagon.
yeah,
Mine was manual and turbocharged, so it's a little bit more of like an enthusiast vehicle. But because I'm such a big fan of drift culture and JDM culture, I've totally changed that build into my preference of what I like. So not only is it stanced out on wide wheels, but it's also rear wheel drive converted, and it's got
hmm
a 6 speed from an STI, and it's got a fully built sleeve block. So you're absolutely right. You start with this thing, and the more logical path would have been, well, go buy a 350Z if you want a drift car. But what
sure.
I've done is essentially turn the car I've been passionate about into the car I wanted it to be, and that's not unique to me. I think you hit
Yeah.
it dead on.
Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatiron's Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatirons.tuning.com and stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning.
All right. Well, welcome back, everybody, to the Flatirons podcast. This is episode number 106, actually. And we have got with us another special guest, a notorious guest, as it were. Art, formerly of Grimspeed, did a lot of stuff with Grimspeed, the notorious ART on Instagram. And Art, you're now kind of going off on a different path. You're setting up your own YouTube page and such. And excited about what you're doing and wanted to kind of bring on and talk about it.
Yeah, well, I am kind of freelance at the moment or in between gigs, and the direction of where I'm going isn't exactly determined quite yet. That's kind of what I'm spending these couple of weeks in between positions trying to figure out. And
Yeah.
some of our conversation is going to be about social media, and that's been pretty heavy on my mind, just because I've been doing social media centered around automotive for as long as I can remember, really, as long as it became relevant in the industry. And I'm sure that's something we'll get into. But
Yeah.
I spent about 9 years at Grimspeed, and in that time, I saw the relevancy that social media had in the entire automotive industry, particularly in Subaru, where I was at, and where I kind of became an expert in, and in the manufacturing space and the retail space.
hmm
So I've kind of based my experience on those things, and you called me notorious. I'm notorious in the Subaru world, so some of your
Yeah,
guests probably know me, and I'm kind of trying to branch out beyond that as well.
for sure. Well, and that's what's so interesting. I'm just going to call you a social media expert. I'm just going to say that right up front because you've been doing this for what, 9, 10 years?
Yeah, well, I've been at Grimspeed for around 9 years, and then I did a little bit of remote work for them prior to that when I was in college, and so yeah, I've got about a decade's worth under my belt, and the definition of social media has definitely changed. I mean, I
Oh
would
yeah.
put when I began, it was mostly on internet forums like Nazion, and so you might not call that social media, but there sure was a lot of conversations surrounding the same topics that we're still talking about 10 years later, just in a different format. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
would say even in the early days, I was a part of it in some way or shape.
Well, that's one of the interesting things with Subaru, and I would say, yeah, forums. Like it was social media before we knew what that was called, but that was definitely a gathering place for Subaru enthusiasts. And I think that like what has made Subaru in the Subaru community what it is today in here in the US, maybe across the world, but I know definitely for sure here in the US is, how many fans of the brand there are, how many of us there are, and how we're able to use the internet, forums, all these different channels and paths to get questions answered, connect, find out what the new cool thing is, find out what works, find out what doesn't. And I mean, it feels like maybe it's just because I've been immersed in it for so long, but it feels like that's something that is a little bit unique to the Subaru community. I don't know if you'd agree.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think there's a reason that people like you and I get drawn into that. It's because it is different than any other enthusiast segment. I mean, I've been a part of Toyota enthusiasts and Mitsubishi and Honda throughout the years, but really I've always gravitated towards Subaru because it does offer something unique. The conversations, the friendships. I mean, most of my friendships have been based around my prior job, but Subarus in general. I mean, even
Yeah.
my relationship at the moment, the way we met was she called me about Subaru advice. And then we kind of got together, and after that, 5 years later, we're still dating.
The
And
rest is
so I
history.
really
Yeah.
do, yeah, I really do think that it's something unique and different that you don't get with other enthusiast groups, and it is based around the communication and the ability to just see what people are doing, how they're building their cars, where they're taking their cars, and that's where social media has really played a major role in, especially the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, and exponentially growing that
Hmm.
segment.
For sure. In kind of getting ready for this, I was thinking about, the history of what I've been involved with and its Subarus. And one of the things that dawned on me, and this is relevant to you actually,
Mhm.
is that Subaru, I think, is unique. Like one of the things that makes it unique is that it's a car and a platform that people get attached to, and that's not unusual. But what's interesting is people end up loving their Subarus so much that whatever their platform is, they decide, okay, I want to do this. And I'm not going to go out and not going to find some other car and try and turn it and use it to do
Mhm.
this. I'm going to take my Subaru and I'm going to do this. So,
Well, I think I'm actually the very best example of that because of my current build, which is a 2004 Forester XT.
yeah,
Comes from the factory as a bit of a grocery getter wagon.
yeah,
Mine was manual and turbocharged, so it's a little bit more of like an enthusiast vehicle. But because I'm such a big fan of drift culture and JDM culture, I've totally changed that build into my preference of what I like. So not only is it stanced out on wide wheels, but it's also rear wheel drive converted, and it's got
hmm
a 6 speed from an STI, and it's got a fully built sleeve block. So you're absolutely right. You start with this thing, and the more logical path would have been, well, go buy a 350Z if you want a drift car. But what
sure.
I've done is essentially turn the car I've been passionate about into the car I wanted it to be. And that's not unique to me. I think you hit
Yeah.
it dead on. Yeah.
And in part, there's such a community. I mean, I remember, man, actually, boy, this is a while ago, so it's a
Mhm.
slightly bit hazy, but one of our rally drivers, Stefan Verdier, actually took his STI and converted it into a drift car back in I think 2007. Don't
Oh,
quote me
in
on
the
that,
early
Stefan. I
years.
apologize if I got that wrong, but and I remember kind of like picking his brain at like, well, now wait a minute, how did you do that? And he's like, oh, well, I just did this, and I like put a spool over the center diff, and then I cut up some axles so that the front axles are just holding in the front bearings, and yeah, it's really not that
Yeah.
bad. Like that it seemed crazy to me, but then it was like
Yeah.
shortly thereafter, and I think there was a Team Orange, if I remember right, that had a couple Subaru drift
That's
cars
right.
way
Yeah. The
back
drift
in the
team.
day.
Yeah. I think they're
Um,
still doing their thing.
yeah, and it's like people see that, and then kind of like what I thought was like, wait a minute, how in the heck do you do this? But then that's where the media connection comes in because there's such an active community that's like having these questions or getting these ideas like, wait a minute, can I do this with this car? And then there's
Mhm.
people that have like done it or started to explore it and like, well, all right, here's what I know. Like there's this sharing of knowledge
Yeah,
that the
and that
community
goes back
has.
to those forum days because
Hmm.
back then, if I was doing a conversion like that, I would post on Naziok, do a thread and say, I'm turning my Forester XT into a drift car. And then you post your pictures and kind of the process, and
Yep.
underneath people can comment. And that really was the genesis of what I would consider kind of social media to be today. The difference is now you can go to a social media feed and type in hashtag Forester XT, and you're going to get tens of thousands of different builds and pages. And if I'm scrolling through and I click on, a cool yellow Forester that I like doing burnouts, and I'm thinking of a specific guy that has a drift Forester, then there's thousands of pictures and videos, and I can DM him and make a connection with that person and share his media. And it runs the gamut of all your interests. I mean, if you like drift Subarus, cool. But if you
Yeah.
like off-road Subarus, if you like rally Subarus, track cars, and that again brings it full circle to the reason that the enthusiast market is so strong is because you can do anything and everything with these cars. And
Yeah,
because social media exists, it's facilitated that growth even greater in those last 5 to 7 years, like I mentioned.
yeah. As thinking about kind of where you started in forums, and forums, they were in every now and then I actually am kind of bummed that forums are not now what they once were.
Right.
I mean that just to say that they do not have the traffic that they once did. Like Nasiok, that used to be like the hub of information. Like I remember when I
Mhm.
started, but we were on Nasiok and I was, spent a decent amount of time every day just getting on there, looking at questions, answering questions, trying to be involved in that community. And there was like tons and tons of people. Like that was the main one. There was a local one here in Colorado that
Mhm.
we were also part of, and it really was like that was the hub. That was the point that everybody went to. But now things have shifted. Like I think social media became a thing, like Facebook,
Mhm.
message boards, all that sort of thing, and it kind of took a lot of the energy out of the forums. But do you ever get nostalgic for those early days?
Sure. Well, I get nostalgic and kind of ticked off at the same time because if I'm looking for some type of information that I need for my build, let's say I'm swapping an engine, I can type into Google VQ engine swap Subaru, and someone might have done it back in 2004.
Oh yeah,
And you go to the forum and it's either shut down or it's got photo bucket pictures that can't be shown anymore, or the information is just non-accessible. And
yeah,
I think that that's the biggest thing. It was an information dump. You could go to Naziok and specifically find step by step pictures and text on how to do a certain thing. That's really, I think, the drawback of current social media is it facilitates quick media. Again, I can look up hashtag whatever. I have a Toyota Cressida, hashtag
hmm
Toyota Cressida, and I can find 10,000 pictures of built Cressidas. But if I need to find something specific, how to swap a 350Z R200 diff into a Cressida, people have done it, but it's really difficult to find on social media. It might be 1,000 posts back on some guy's page.
hmm
So I think there is a void that we're missing that probably got filled a little bit by YouTube. I mean,
hmm
this is going to end up on YouTube. There's going to be information on this that people
yeah,
hopefully see years later. But people use that as an opportunity. And in my example of that diff swap, they might make a standalone video, put it on YouTube, and for the next decade, people are going to find it via search. So maybe
yeah.
that's taking the place of things like Naziok a little.
I would agree with that. I mean, it's what the cool thing is exactly what you said about forums is it was such a resource in an organized place for information
Yeah.
to be stored. I mean, there was a number of threads in ASIC that I had bookmarked for a long time that I was like if I ever have a question, like there one of the ones that I still go back to every now and then today is they had in the FAQ section a list of every Subaru factory turbo and
Yeah.
what it came on, what it was, what it was capable of, how much power produced, rough flow rate, because there's just so much alphabet soup of oh, I've got a VF 36. Okay, well, which one is that? What's the difference between a 36, 37, 39, 40? All these
Right.
numbers. It's hard to keep everything straight, but I can always go back to that resource and see what it is. And just
Exactly.
as less people are tapping into it and utilizing this kind of repository, then getting that same kind of equivalent information and having a reference point to go back
Mhm.
to has become a lot more challenging for sure.
It has, and I don't know if that's kind of aging ourselves to think that that's the superior system to do it. But I would agree with you. It's always nice to have a kind of an index of that information. But I think these days it's just people's mentalities have changed. They might not necessarily want to see a layout of 15 different OEM turbos. They might
Yeah.
want to see, it seems like the preference is comparison. They're going to
hmm
compare this aftermarket turbo to that aftermarket turbo, and that's a video that could get tens of thousands of views. And what it
Yeah.
really helps is people allowing people to make a decision on the product that they want to buy or the service or the tuning or the direction they want to take their build.
Sure.
So yeah, those Nasdaq days are kind of gone besides what is still out there online. But it's an inevitable change, and it gets me curious, well, what's it all going to look like 5 to 10 years from now?
Yeah. That's honestly what I kind of wonder about a little bit myself. But I think that the community, the super community, people that are super enthusiasts that are trying to think outside the box or use their cars for what they specifically want to use them for and find a way to do it. I think there's still a lot of information floating out there. It's just not maybe as easily uh, it's not as easy to find as it once was, but it's still out there,
Mhm.
just like you said. And YouTube is it has kind of become that repository for the people that are putting the information out. I mean, that's honestly that was one of the motivating factors for me to do what we're doing here is
Right.
I started getting all of these questions and the questions became repetitive. I mean, you can see patterns.
Mhm.
And so it's like, all right, I need an easier way to answer this question. I would much rather have like I need to find a way to answer this question one time and then be able to refer back to it instead of
Yeah.
having to answer the same question hundreds and hundreds of times. And that was kind of like the initial motivation to start putting some of that information together onto our YouTube page. And like I said, there's other people that have done the same.
Right. And on a smaller scale, you said I've been trying to grow my YouTube page, and that's kind of been my priority over the last couple of weeks. And I've done exactly that. There's so many people. When you have a unique car like my Forester, you have lots of people that reach out via DM or they text me, whatever, for information on how I built it because they want to do something similar. And it's relatively straightforward. The information is out there, but in this day and age, people just want it like right away. They want someone to give you the bullet points of I built it this way, these are the modifications I made, this is how much I spent, and this is where I purchased it from. So what I did is instead of repeating the same thing over and over, I created my original video of the breakdown of my Forester. So I
Mhm.
talked about all the exterior parts, all the custom modifications, all the JDM stuff, and kind of where I purchased and made a list of it in the description of my YouTube video. So now, in the last couple of weeks, when people ask, well, where did you get that spoiler? I refer them to the video because I talk about it. And right
Yeah.
now, as we speak, I'm working on a drivetrain and kind of underbody video. I'll do one about the engine. And that stuff lives forever. And it really, beyond helping me in views and growth, it helps people that are trying to do similar builds or get ideas by having a concise, um, wealth of information. And maybe
Yeah.
that circles back to a little bit of the Naziok thing. I mean, you said that's exactly what you went to that forum for. Well, it still exists just in a different format.
For sure. And I think that there's an interesting advantage to a video medium to be the repository for that information in that like what you're exactly what you're describing with your Forester is you can now pull that car up, put it up in the air, what have you, and get under the car and show exactly what you did and why and what
Mhm.
worked and what didn't. Because like as often as I get nostalgic for the forum days, then I have to kind of remind myself that it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns.
Right.
That like it was also a little bit challenging sometimes, and because everybody has a keyboard, pretty much, at least I think everybody has. Maybe people are using their thumbs on a
Yeah, these
phone, but
days.
let's just say keyboard, and they could, somebody would come in and I did this and this works, and then there was a lot of counter arguments back and forth of like, well, no, that doesn't work. Yes, it does. It's hard. It became confusing. There
Mhm.
was problems and there was a lot of information, but there was also a lot of confusion that stemmed from that because, you know, there's a lot of people that didn't think it would work or would try and say something counter to what you have say done and know that it works. But when you have a video format and you can actually show them, here it is.
Yeah.
Here's my Forester that is rear wheel drive, and this is how it does, and this is how the suspension works and whatever. It's like this, I don't know, it's like this extra stamp of like this does actually work.
Yeah, but that also, I would say this is where we have a bit of a gray area these days that we didn't really run into on Naziok, where there's a bit of a conflict between real advice and what's getting monetized and paid for. So if you're an
Mm,
influencer on YouTube and your career is to build cars and show off products and unbox things, then typically companies will work with you, and then you're sort of obligated to only give the good information on those things. I mean, I think in general, YouTube influencers will speak the truth about the products. If it's just something that isn't going to work or they don't like or doesn't fit, they'll mention it. But I think it's a little bit more padded than it used to be. I remember
mm.
Naziok reviews or product unboxings used to be very cut and dry. Hey, this thing sucks, don't use it, or this is the greatest product of all time. So I'm wondering if we're kind of in the weeds of um, is the incentive clouding the information?
That is the flip side of that coin. That is for sure. I mean, I think where like in part that's like if you're going to use a forum as a tool, social media as a tool, a YouTube channel as a tool,
Mhm.
You have to pay attention to that channel, and it's something where generally, hopefully, you're not. If you have a question and want to try and do something, you don't search for it, watch the top result, and then that's it. There's maybe a little bit more research, due diligence
Right.
that is worth doing, and maybe that's worth a discussion in of itself. Is like, okay, you want to do this project, and this is something that you've done. This is something that we've done, and you're going to get on the computer, on the internet. You're going to get in the tubes, and you're going to search for an answer. What kind of strategy do you think is the best practice to use if you're going to try and research a problem that you're having or whatnot?
Well, to me, the first thing I think of is companies like yours and companies like Grimspeed, and there's a ton of similar ones out in the Subaru enthusiast market. And I think really what separates a good company from a bad company these days is the type of customer service that you can offer. So obviously the social media presence is great, but I've seen companies that have a great social presence and you can't get them on the phone. You can't go to their
Mm,
shop, you can't email them, they won't respond within 10 days. So I'm kind of old school in the thinking of customer service trumps everything.
mm,
And then the social media experience sort of complements the customer service. So for me, if I'm looking for something, sure, I'll go to YouTube and I'll look it up. But in a lot of cases, I'll call the shop and I'll talk to the people that do this stuff day in and day out. A great example might be our local tuning shop, JM Automotive, about 15 minutes away from me. Those guys, they'll see 5, 6 Subarus a day. So when I have a
yeah.
question or I need service work done or upgrading something that I can't do in my garage, they're the first ones I call. And so I think there are two sides to that too. I mean, you don't just
Hmm.
want to call a company and pick their brain and never give them a dime for your money. You want to be able to support the companies that support you back. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of a fine line of I'm sure this is something you could speak to a little bit more closely than I can. With Grimspeed, we prioritize customer service, and we never had an incentive to like upsell or cold call or make any sort of numbers or commissions. We were just there to help. And there
Yeah.
were times when I was a part of the customer service department, I'd be on the phone for 45 minutes to an hour with a guy. And at the end of it, he might not buy a thing. But the real beauty in that is it's community building.
Hmm.
And the assumption is if they're really enthusiastic enough to talk to you for that long, they'll probably come back and buy a part from you someday, whether it's a week or 2 years from now.
Sure. It Believe me, it's a challenge, and I can I can weigh in on that in a second. But the point that I want to hit on that you made is
Mm-hmm.
that, if you've got the question, you're going to reach out, and like
Mm-hmm.
what the response you get back, even if it's just something as simple as a comment or a message, not even necessarily picking up the phone. I mean, that's definitely one way to kind of get a sense of, okay, is this information source giving me information back? The
Mm-hmm.
big tip, I guess, that I would say if you're going to use anything on the internet to try and solve a problem is nothing ever goes perfectly. Nothing ever is perfect. And if the information that you're getting is just that it's super easy, that like there's no problems, there's no extra issues, if there's no downside to what the answer is, that
Mm-hmm.
might be a little tip that, okay, well, maybe what I'm getting is distilled down and it's just kind of like the good stuff. And maybe there's a couple other considerations that I have to, you know, seek out. And so like if you're only
Mm-hmm.
seeing like one side of the answer and like there's no downsides, I mean that's one tip off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the other thing too is just like the breadth of information, like how much, what is the experience level, kind of like what you said with your shop. Like they're working on Subarus all day long. If you've got a weird problem and you call them up and like, oh yeah, we've dealt with that before, and you know that they've dealt with a lot of Subarus, then that's probably going to be a reliable source. If you find something that's just like like they're talking about all sorts of different makes and models and like, hey, here's this
Mm-hmm.
common problem that Subarus all have, but you don't see any other Subaru content on the channel or whatnot. Like, well, I mean, maybe it's right, maybe it's not, but maybe this is the cue to go out there. Let's look for more instances.
Mm-hmm.
Can I find two, three, four people that are all telling me like, here's the problem and then here's the solution? Are they all kind of disseminating the same path, the same solution? Like I think that's whenever I'm trying to use the internet to find something, I want to find multiple different sources that are all kind of giving me the same thing. Like it all fits together, it all makes sense.
Yeah, and that makes me think if you're the shop or the manufacturer, the retailer, whatever you may be, and you're creating social media content, whether you're just starting out or if you've been doing it for a decade, it is important how you shape it and who you tailor it towards. So deciding who your demographic is it a bunch of makes and models? Because that could be a tough, on one hand, you have a bunch of content, if you're any make model off-road on-road track, you can post a bunch of content and you're kind of spoiled for choice.
Hmm.
But you're also extending yourself to having a million questions that are unrelated. The
Yeah.
beauty about the Subaru enthusiast market is if your company is generalizing in that, then the questions are more or less the same. It's like one of the same 15 questions over and over, and that makes the customer service or marketing person's job a little bit easier. But that's something that I have thought about. I mean, especially now that I'm kind of looking forward into what sort of businesses I either want to be creating or working at is it going to be centralized to one thing or going to be more broad than that? And
Yeah.
social media kind of tailors, or you can tailor your social media to both
Yeah.
types.
Well, and two, it's one of these interesting things. Like, I mean, we have an experience with an automotive background. A lot of times, what you're doing when you're modifying a car or fixing the car, whatever, is you're solving a problem. And the subtext is that problem is something either the car doesn't naturally do well, or something that there's kind of like this deficiency that you need to kind of beef up. Like I'm thinking here specifically of like Subaru's PCV system. Like this is something that always, like for many, many cars, needs a little bit of attention. For some cars, especially with making lots of power and race cars and whatnot, okay, well now you're going to have to take some more steps. Like it gets to the point where it's something where the factory system is not sufficient. You've got to modify it to a certain degree. So how do you frame the problem, and then how do you bring in the solution as well? And so
Right.
that's one of the key things too. Like as far as content goes, and if you're looking at a lot of content, is yeah, how are they just defining the problem? How are they explaining the problem? And then how does that then dovetail into the solution?
Well, that makes me think the first problem, if you want to call it that people get when they get a Subaru isn't really like a mechanical or maintenance issue. I think it's the problem of there's just not enough power and there's not enough uniqueness. And
Mm,
so, in other words, they go, well, I've got the stock engine. My problem is it's kind of slow. What can I do to make it quicker? I mean, my buddy's
hmm.
such and such car is quicker than mine. How do I keep up with him? Because we
Hmm.
know that Subarus aren't necessarily known for their straight line speed. And they're
Right.
great in the winter. They're great around the track, and man, you can't pick a better car for a off-road or gravel day. But you start racing some other cars, and it kind of puts you to shame. So I think that's the first search that a lot of people have is what do I do to upgrade this car? I mean, we've been in the industry long enough that we could rattle off a list of kind of first mods, or if you come to a shop like yours with 30 grand in your pocket, here's what you're going to sell them, and here's how you can make your car faster. But a lot of people don't know that. A lot of
Yeah.
people are just starting out, or a lot of people have had a stock WRX for years now and haven't
Yeah.
really found the enthusiasm until today. So that I think is one of the real bonuses with both forums early on and now social media is that you can find whatever it is you're looking for, and compare and contrast what's worked for other people and what hasn't.
Yeah.
Who's made what power on what parts and where have they had issues. And it's all out
Yeah.
there.
Well, and that is your point is one. I mean, that's kind of like the normal day to day. That is certainly the starting point for many, many people. How do I improve the performance? How do I make the car faster? But that has now changed to a large degree. And
Mhm.
it seems like going forward, it is only going to change more probably. And that puts it's something that honestly I'm still trying to wrap my head around, and it's coming out there. What I'm talking about here is what is possible, what are people able to do, and what are you actually now no longer able to do. And this is just
Mhm.
as far as being compliant with EPA standards and so forth. And it's changing the landscape a little bit, which is making things interesting. I
Right. And I
mean,
think we could have probably just a separate podcast about that in itself, the EPA regulations, how the industry's changing, and what sort of things you can't get away with anymore
yeah.
because it's totally different. I mean, I remember coming into Grimspeed and we made external wastegate up pipes, we made catless down pipes, and
Hmm.
now that's just not for a major US manufacturer like that, it's just not possible. I
Right.
mean, you still see people getting away with some of those parts, but it's mostly overseas kind of no-name companies that sell in the US, and they're going to be drowned out eventually as well. So how do you make power on these cars while still staying as close to compliant as you can? I mean,
Hmm.
especially if you live in a place like California.
Yeah. Well, like in Colorado now, we basically have very similar emissions constraints compared to California. There's more states that are following it. New York State, I believe, this January
Mhm.
followed suit. So it's definitely things are changing and it's getting interesting.
Right.
And it's not going to be as interesting or straightforward as it once was. But like to kind of bring it back, like that's where the enthusiast in the community that becomes the biggest and the best resource because there's a lot of what the other thing that always has stood out to me about Subarus is in the enthusiast base, you have some just crazy smart folks
Mhm.
that really that that have got tons of experience, know how Subarus tick, and they're a lot of those people either they have an automotive background, they work sometimes they work for manufacturers like Grimspeed, Cobb, what have you.
Mhm.
They're enthusiasts just like, the person that's excited about their car, and these people are going to find solutions. They're I mean, if you can turn a Forester into a drift car, and you can turn a Forester into an overlanding vehicle, and I mean, you could do anything you want with the Forester. If you've been able to figure out all these different solutions to that crazy problem, they're going to figure out something for this as well. And that's where
Right.
it's like you've got it. This is the current methods is you just have to tap into that resource and let the community kind of churn on the problem a little bit, and then there's going to be some answers and some solutions that come out for sure.
Yeah, and that makes me think maybe there's some concept to kind of hierarchy in social media. In other words, you have these high level guys that have 50,000, 150, a million followers, whatever it is, and they're doing specifically Subaru related content. Then you have people underneath them that might have half the followers that are doing half the content, and it trickles all the way down to the beginner that just got a WRX, created their Instagram account, and posted a couple pictures. And
Yeah.
so you kind of look up to the top guys, and as you grow, as you put time into this, whether you're an individual or a business and you have social media growth over years, you sort of slot yourself as that expert. And that's, I think, a very important thing from the business perspective is you have to have a strong social media because you need to be the go-to for the people below that account. Typically, let's just say you have 10,000 people on your YouTube. The individual guy that has 50,000 on his YouTube isn't going to you to seek your content. He's creating the sort of the point at which you're looking up to. And
Hmm.
so, I mean, if you're a business and you don't have social or you have a weak account, you're really doing yourself a disservice because you're kind of alienating yourself away from the eyes that will eventually purchase from your company or work with
Yeah.
you.
Well, and my philosophy on it has always been that, I mean, because it is such a cool community, I want to be a part of the community. And if we run into a problem and I figure out what the solution is, I want to put the solution out. I would
Right.
much rather not keep that behind, like keep that secret, keep it behind, the door or something like that, and then you have to come through us and like restrict it. I'd rather just get it out there to help everybody because, you know, um, like with Subaru race cars, the Subaru's presence at the track that it's kind of ebbed and flowed through the years.
Mm-hmm.
There's a point when I started, which is man back in 2006, really. And I was tracking my Subaru a little bit before then. Like Subarus were everywhere. Like there was
Mm-hmm.
many Subarus at most track days. And being in Colorado where it snows, I mean, there's a lot of people that Subarus were their toy car and their daily driver. So that was a part of it. But then like it kind of fell off for a while, and then it started to come back a little bit with the BRZ. Then it's kind of fallen off, and now it seems like it's maybe coming back again. Um, but you know, you a lot of Subarus have difficulties, and you see people that kind of they would get to a certain point, hit some of these kind of barriers when you get up to certain performance levels with your Subaru
Mm-hmm.
and speed, and then they kind of would jump ship and jump platform.
Right.
And it's there are some obstacles, there are some challenges with the Subaru, but if you love Subarus like we do, what I realized is,
Mhm.
well, if we can solve some of these problems and kind of explain what we're going through or what the solution is, and help more people that are coming up or that have the same problem to get the solution, hopefully keeps more Subarus at the track.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to transparency in a company. You don't necessarily want to keep all information proprietary, and you got to say, oh, well, you have to pay in order for us to tell you or for us to do the service.
Yeah,
In some cases, you do need to offer that as an incentive for people to, whether it's following your pages or buying your products, to kind of hook them onto what you are doing, what your company is all about. And I'm a big fan of transparency. I think
mhm,
there's a ton of value in it. I mean, at Grimspeed, we talked a lot about the how we create the parts, how we engineer them, how we design them, and this goes all the way back to those Nasioc days as well. You'd
yeah,
have 2-page write-ups on how we're developing a product that might not be released for 6 months, and then that would turn into 50 pages of comments. And
yeah,
not only does that live forever, but what it did is create a baseline for people to trust the brand of the company when it's early on, but also that particular product because the engineering went into it, and
yeah,
we put in the due diligence to kind of make it into a good product.
yeah,
And I think that that's something that's easier said than done these days because social media, you might take a picture of a new product you're working on, but that doesn't carry the same weight as really putting like a consolidated engineering transparency effort behind it.
yeah,
So what you're speaking to is kind of in that realm where, yeah, there's an importance on these type of videos where if you have information or if you have something to offer, don't just keep it under wraps, put it out there, make it social, and then people will inevitably follow you because they like what you're giving them.
yeah. And a lot of times with I mean, Subaru track car, for instance, a lot of the key piece of the puzzle is actually understanding the problem that you're up against. I mean, the example that comes to mind is radiator caps.
Mhm.
Subaru radiator caps, they're very simple, but we discovered that it's way more complicated or that deserves a lot more consideration than I had ever given it before.
Mhm.
And there was a handful of people that knew, and that like once we kind of like got to this certain point, got a couple of people that reached out like, oh, well, do you know what the difference is between a one-way cap and a two-way cap?
Mhm.
What? And you go down that rabbit hole and you figure out like all of a sudden like, oh, okay, this is actually really simple. It's super
Mhm.
straightforward. I've never heard about it before. I mean, I've been doing this for over a decade. There was some longtime Subaru techs that I asked about this. They were like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you reach
Yeah.
out and like to a couple other people and they're like, oh yeah, it's this. And then all of a sudden it's just like, oh, okay. And that was one of the big motivators for us to put out that video explaining like, okay, this is actually how this works and this is why this is really important.
Right.
And it bit us for honestly probably about a decade, for about 10 years of running our Pikes Peak car, just chasing these crazy cooling problems because we were running two-way caps that were the same pressure in two different locations, and we were suffering from all these little issues that certainly creates.
Well, and that's hugely valuable information, and I think it's sort of a brick in the wall. It's kind of a
Mhm.
building block towards what you were talking about before, which is the ebb and the flow of the enthusiast in Subaru. You said that racing was a huge part of it, and then it
Yeah,
sort of cooled down, and then it went back up. Well, I think videos like that, once you put out 10 of those or 100 of those, and the other company and another individual, there's tens of thousands of these videos pertaining to any sort of modification that you want to do on a Subaru. Well, it's propping up the entire enthusiast segment.
yeah,
And so I think that that's hugely important. If you just erased social media, if you erased the information that's out there, then people are going to get discouraged because not everyone can figure it out on their own. And then you're just
right.
going to see a decline everywhere, whether it's a decline on how to build a race car or a decline on what exterior modifications I should do or what suspension I should do to make it a stance build or how do I do air ride. All those things, really, I do think that people like yourself and social media in a grander sense are really doing a good job of facilitating.
Yeah, for sure. And it's worth mentioning at this point that you, who's watching this video, you play a part in this solution and this information getting out, which is to interact, like and subscribe, which we say all the time, but it really does matter. And when you find some nugget of information, share it. Like, if you are watching and you like something that we've done, it makes a huge difference to like and subscribe to our channel. if you like something that Art has done, it makes a huge difference to him to like and subscribe to his channel, especially Art, as you're trying to get the channel, started off. And it's amazing how quickly you're able to get, I think over a little over 4,000 subscribers to your channel, which is awesome. But
Right.
but like supporting the people that make the content that you like or that is helpful, that's what helps the content creators keep doing what they're doing. And
Right.
I
I
think,
think it helps you get past the challenge of creating content because,
mhm,
if we're talking about Instagram, I just did an Instagram post about a half hour ago before we started, and it took me, 5 minutes. Not a big deal. I try and do at least a daily post just to kind of stay relevant and give the
mhm,
people that are following me something to look forward to. But when we're talking about YouTube, to make a valuable video, if you're talking about, something like cooling issues, it's not a quick 5 minute thing. It could take you days and days. And you got to consider that when you're a business, that's not really the absolute priority. I mean, you have to keep the lights on by selling products
right.
and working on cars and doing all sorts of stuff. So these days, social media has become a giant role in that. And it's tough to balance the day-to-day things like the have to do's with the I should do's as well.
Yeah,
And in order to put out good content, it takes significant amount of time. And these
yeah,
days, it takes full-time social media people, which didn't really exist. I mean, I remember back in college in 2012, I would have laughed at a social media degree, but it
yeah,
was only a few years after I graduated with my marketing and international business double major that I looked back and the college that I was going to was offering social media degrees. And if that was around when I was a bit younger, I definitely would have done that. But it was still a bit of like a joke. Well, what are they going to do? Sit around on Facebook all day? And these days, that's exactly what they do. You have
yeah,
individuals or teams of people that are on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube all day long, interacting, making content, and it's a full-time job. And I would say any business that isn't heading in that same direction, you're really going to be hurting if you don't have an expert within your walls.
yeah. It's one of those things. It all kind of comes back to community.
Mm-hmm.
Is the community found the community was able to find itself and grow like on forums or whatever. And now the community has moved to these new channels, and the community realized how much of a resource these new channels could be, the social media channels and whatnot. But it seems like a lot of businesses, I would say the bigger the business, the later to that game they have been, because it just it's like this small effort, that it's like if you're going to try it and move a mountain one grain of sand at a time. It took a long time for these really big companies to see that there really was a lot of movement going on here, and that there really was a lot of significance, a lot of importance that these social media channels can have. But the smaller guys, which I mean, I would throw us into that, it just kind of realized, because we're smaller, and so we have a lot more direct contact with our customer base, with the community, with the enthusiast groups, realized very quickly, like, okay, no, this is where everybody's kind of shifting to, and so we want to be a part of it, and we want to start having, conversation over here. We can't just be,
Mm-hmm.
sitting back behind a website, and that's it. We've got to actually interact. And
Right, and that recognition is hugely important. And I think that ironically enough, small companies recognize that before large companies. Maybe because the amount of content they create is less significant. So if you're a major company and you don't do social media, the expectation is that you have to hire a whole department to be able to properly create a social media presence or brand awareness.
yeah,
Whereas with a small company, if you're a couple of people making t-shirts, let's say, starting up a social media account on any platform is incredibly easy, right? It takes 10
hmm,
minutes just to set it up. And then if you want to do a quick 10-second video of a shirt that you're printing or a hoodie, new apparel that's coming out, it's really easy. So like the start point for a small company is incredibly easy. Now, growth from there is, I think, the challenge because
yeah,
having content that keeping content relevant to your users and your viewers over time can be something difficult, and you have to get creative. And now with the amount of social media that's out there and the type of platforms, you have to have the equipment and you have to have the knowledge and you have to have the wherewithal to be able to present it in a way that people want to watch it. Because if you don't come with something that is eye-catching and relevant, 100 other companies or people will.
Yeah.
I think that's truly the tough part of social right now is how do you get recognized and how do you become successful amongst a sea of other content creators?
Especially now that it's like it's this exponential growth once all these other companies are realizing how important it is. I really started engaging with our YouTube channel in 2016. So it's been,
Mhm.
geez, almost 7 years now, which is a long time ago. And at the time, there was not very much content out there. But now there's a ton of content. There's probably people that are going to watch this that are themselves thinking about launching a YouTube channel. In fact, you yourself are one of these
Yeah.
people that are like, I now want to launch a YouTube channel. So I guess
Right.
to that end, now knowing what you know, like you have this huge advantage in having been a part of this and seen the change and kind of get to the point where it is.
Hmm.
Now you're starting with a clean slate. Is
Hmm.
there a thing or two that you know that when you started to like really kind of launch your own channel again, that you're like, okay,
Hmm.
if I'm going to do one or two things, this is going to be it.
Yeah, I think consistency is the big thing for me. I mean, if you create an account and you go really hard on it for the first couple of weeks, and you're putting out content every few days, and then you just sort of take a bit of a break, and then maybe 2 weeks passes, and people tend to lose interest. And so you have to have some sort of goal, and you have to have some sort of consistency to get to that goal. Now, my goal right now is just follower growth. I've
Mhm.
got a decently strong Instagram account. It's something that kind of did for fun and on the side while I was working at Grimspeed. And so that's a good little leverage point that if I start a business of my own or if I work for the next business, then I already am bringing these followers along with me.
Mhm.
On YouTube, I did have to press the restart button a little bit. So that's kind of my priority is just letting people into who I am. We talked about transparency a little bit. That's what I'm trying to do is show people this is what I like to do. I've been a Subaru enthusiast for over a decade, amongst a bunch of other cars. I mean, I have 6 or 7 builds right now, which, I mean, for better or for worse,
A lot of
that's where all my
content.
money goes.
Yeah.
And they're not all Subarus. So
Hmm.
that's what I'm trying to leverage a little bit is, hey, come into my channel, see what I do, see what I enjoy doing, and the way that I'm presenting it to you is kind of a grassroots thing. I'm not a major company. I don't have millions of dollars behind me. I just have a couple of hours of free time in the evenings, and I've been filming most of my stuff on iPhone and GoPro and doing my own
Yeah.
basic editing. And people have really latched onto that. They like that grassroots feel of the channel. So
Hmm.
that's at least the start. But then where it goes from there, it's a little early on in kind of my solo adventure to determine that. But things I've learned from working at Grimspeed. If I had a time machine, I wish I would have gone back and started a YouTube account back in 2016 or
Mm.
2006, better yet. A good example is at Grimspeed when I took over the social accounts, the Instagram was at about 2,000 followers, and
Wow.
when I left, it was close to 100,000. And so,
That's a
there's
lot.
lots of leverage on an account like that. If you're releasing a new product, let's say, you've got 100,000 eyes on it potentially. If that's your own personal account and you're starting your own business, well, that's a lot more attention than you'd be getting if you're starting that t-shirt business with 0 followers.
Hmm.
And so there's some hindsight there, but I also like to look towards the future and say, okay, well, it's 2023. When I wake up in 2030, will I have wished that I started an account back then? And the
Hmm.
answer is likely yes, because I think it's kind of never too late to start a social media account. You might
Hmm.
think it's oversaturated, but the reality is it's that consistency of time. You do it now, you be consistent, you're going to wake up 3, 5, 10 years from now, and you're going to thank yourself that you have a relatively large following that now will help you supplement whatever your next adventure is.
Yeah. And I mean, kind of to build on that, one of the things that I would say is, I mean, I've done a decent number of videos, like not the most of anybody out there by a long shot, because
But
again,
over 100, I mean, that's a big accomplishment just in the podcast.
and it feels huge. It definitely feels huge, but then you look at some of these other bigger people, and it's just like, man, we're just scratching the surface. And for us, we're small. I mean, that like
Mhm.
I am one of 6 people here right now trying to keep
Mhm.
everything moving and do this as well. So it's really just trying to find the time to squirrel away to make some of this content here and there, even still for us. But it's a big priority for me because I know how important it is to have these conversations to get this information out there to make it available to people. But
Mhm.
as many videos as we have made, every one, I feel like there's still something to learn from the next one. Like it's crazy. Like I go back and I watch like the first couple of videos that I made. I'm like, man, I would not do that the same way now. But I
Mhm.
had you got to start somewhere. Like just like you're saying, if you think that you have something to say, if you think you want to try and use your voice in this platform, you just what you've got to do is start. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of this that I think you can only figure out by doing the work, getting in there, putting out the content and going back and looking at something they made 2 years ago and going like, I don't know what I was thinking, but now I
Right.
know better and I can maybe let me try and come at this a different way. Let's try and do a different spin. You gotta do the work.
You got to do the work, and it's kind of cliche to say, but you can't be afraid of the failure either, because
Hmm.
just like anything, people start out at zero. If you're a
Hmm.
car enthusiast, let's say you're a master tech at a tuning shop, you didn't start with that knowledge.
Yeah.
A decade ago, you started with a wrench and you started learning and kind of soaking up that information, whether it was through people, techs around you, or online, on forums, and then on social. You had to grow into that. So if you were on day one kind of freaking out, having anxiety about, well, I don't know how to pull a Subaru engine and fully rebuild it and put it back in the car, and then you never get started on learning, well, then you're never going to accomplish anything. And I
Yeah,
think social media, in a sense, is like that. I mean, both on an individual and a business level, is you got to start somewhere, and chances are you're not going to be great at it, and you're going to screw some things up, and you're going to have some misinformation. And if you're doing a session like this, or at Grimsby, we used to do live sessions, so I would talk for an hour off the top of my head. There's definitely things I got wrong or
mm,
said the wrong thing, and ultimately, what I've discovered is most people out there don't care. They don't
hmm,
care if you correct yourself in a later video, cool. If you don't, and they pick up on an error or an issue, they usually can realize what that was and identify it. But that shouldn't stop you from continually putting out good content, and it only
yeah,
gets better with time.
for
And yeah,
sure.
you're right. You look back 2 years from now at the mistakes you made in those first videos, or man, the video quality was horrible, or the editing was bad, or whatever it was. All that shows you is that's growth. And
Yeah,
then you look at your follower count, and hopefully that growth matches.
for sure. All right. Well, as we're getting close to an hour here, what I want to ask you about is the future because I just noticed that like you said you've got some projects in mind and you just recently posted up a video about one of these projects, which is
Mm-hmm.
your GC race car.
Yeah,
So let's talk about what you have in the works. Maybe like for people that haven't seen that video, kind of
right.
explain what that is, and then you can hop over to Art's YouTube channel and watch all that.
Yeah, well, you're being pretty generous calling it a race car, because what it is a budget race car build, and it's something that I've wanted to do forever. And this is just from my own enthusiasm as a Subaru owner. The first Subaru I ever owned was a 2.5 RS coupe, and I actually got it in Colorado when I was in
Hmm.
college out there. And it eventually rusted away. But what I wanted to do was buy another GC coupe, and instead of doing this big like $30,000 show build or race car build, I wanted to limit myself to maybe 5 or 6 grand and just gut it and throw a TD04 turbo on it and kind of do the paint myself and the body work myself and see what I could do for that relatively small amount of money. And I finally got that opportunity. I picked up the car a few years ago and I've been dailying it in the winters. And I decided, all right, let's kind of put my money where my mouth is. And now I've decided to do a build series on it.
Hmm.
So that started a little bit at Grimspeed. So there's some episodes on the Grimspeed YouTube page, but then I took it back over in my garage and I'm just going through. The last video I posted was a full interior makeover. So, painted the interior, race seats, harness, and block dash. And really, it does feel like a little budget race car at this point. And I think that that's a good way to let people kind of into my world, into what I'm doing just for fun on the side. This is the type of thing that I would go home and work on and do work on the weekends. And eventually I'm going to drive that car out of the garage and go do some ice racing with it or go do some off-road stuff. So that's one of the projects. But I mean, I've got, like I mentioned, my Drift Forester, that's sort of a
Hmm.
never ending project. And I want to do maybe a version 2 of that where I really make it like a purpose built drift car, maybe gut it, cage it, beef up the rear end, and really go and maybe not compete with it, but go and do some track time with it.
Hmm.
And then I've also got I'm a big Toyota fan. I've got a Toyota Cressida, which is an actual drift car. It's got a 1J swap, R154 manual transmission. So that's like the drift car. Then I've got a Toyota Previa. If you guys know what that
Oh
is,
yeah,
it's rear wheel drive, mid engine, supercharged minivan
yeah.
that a lot of people have never seen.
The
And
the
then I've got
minivan, the minivan
yeah,
part there is the crazy bit. But
it
yeah,
is the crazy bit, and it's a three door too.
yeah.
So it's got one sliding door on the side and two up front. I actually just posted a video just doing some
Hmm.
little snow burnouts in it that people really enjoyed. And then just a bunch of other projects that I've got, like my motorcycles and my mopeds, things like that, and all the things that I want to do. I mean, I'm a diehard car enthusiast, a diehard super enthusiast, but in general, everything and anything to do with cars. And I've said this for a long time. I'm 33 now, and I expect to be wrenching till I'm 80.
Hmm.
And with we talked about future a little bit, now that I've got the opportunity to kind of go off on my own and maybe work with me individually, but other companies, I want to get better at some of the fabrication skills and things that I could do at home, but also with specialty equipment. And I think what that could eventually turn into is me doing a ground up build where I'm doing all the welding, I'm doing the painting, I'm doing the body work, and that all comes from learning those type of things. And
Hmm.
I think that's the most value that I can offer on my YouTube page for those considering subscribing is you can watch me grow the skills and eventually, maybe in X amount of years, I do a ground up build and you guys get to see where it all started.
For sure. And that's like what you're describing with your budget. I don't know, track car. We'll just call it a track car, race car,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, that is the dream for so many people. I mean, man, so many of us started out driving just an Impreza of some vintage or other,
Mhm.
and it you see the glimpses of how fun the platform is. Just daily driving it, in high school, college, what have you,
Yep.
and to be able to kind of like, all right, I'm gonna take it all apart, take everything out of it, and then like build it back up to have this fun that I always kind of dreamed of doing with my first car or whatever, or for some of them maybe it is their first car,
Yep.
and then actually go out there and do it. So that's a very cool approach. I'm excited to see how that progresses.
Well, I appreciate that. I am trying to keep it more attainable for the average person. And already I've gotten DMs on Instagram of pictures of other people's similar builds. Or
Hmm.
the coolest thing is, hey, I've had this car for a few years and you gave me the push I needed to start doing this. And they'll send me a picture of their gutted interior and their engine halfway out. So I
Hmm.
think that's really cool because at the end of it, like, I mean, if you're somewhat financially stable, $3,000 to $5,000 build is a pretty attainable thing. And
Yeah.
the we talked about some of the downsides of social media. Well, you can get really lost in kind of a rabbit hole of, oh my God, look at all these amazing builds. I can never do this. You see, SEMA builds and 100,000 plus six-figure builds, and it kind of discourages you. So I'm trying to do the opposite. I'm trying to show people that you can do these things and at a grassroots level, and then maybe build that up over time. Like right now, it's a $5,000 car. Maybe the next one's 10 grand. Maybe eventually you build a real race car with a real cage and you're taking it to real events as opposed to just some, like ice races and things like that. So
Yeah.
progression is really cool to watch. That's what I'm interested in when I look at people's social media and especially YouTube over the years. And that's kind of what I want to provide for people. And, I'm going to progress regardless. And
Yeah.
so I just want to document it and put it out there, if anything, for my own sake, but hopefully people find it interesting enough to tune in.
Anything like that, it's just people, anybody that starts a project and shows the steps of the project, it's going to inspire other people. It all brings it back to that community. You're you're
Mhm.
you're making the information and the process, the trials and the tribulations accessible to the community, which then therefore also helps to build the community. And
Right.
that's why it's fun to be involved with an active community like the Subaru people, like car people in
Yep.
general, where that like this everybody's trying to find something that they've can do that they've always dreamed of doing, and like, all right, I'm gonna watch these people that are kind of doing some of the inroads that I want to take, and let's see what they can do, and then
Mhm.
take that inspiration and go to your own garage and
Right.
start taking something
And
apart.
it really just breeds positivity. I mean, that's another major factor with the Subaru community is it's overwhelmingly positive.
Hmm.
Whereas the other things you might get a lot of hate. Oh, you're doing this to this car, you're stripping it out, or you're cutting this part off, or you're modifying it in a certain way. It could kind of breed hate. Where in the super community, it's the polar opposite. Rarely do I ever get poor criticism about my own builds. It's just, people that might not be interested, they don't watch, or maybe they tune in and just kind of go look at something else. But the people that do appreciate it really make that evident, through the
Yeah.
comments, through the DMs, through sort of imitation, being the sincerest form of flattery. I see that too, especially with my Forester. Lots of people doing similar modifications. Well, I got the ideas for my modifications from someone else.
Yeah.
So, it's just like, it's such a great community of enthusiasts that I'm really thankful that I kind of fell into it when I was younger and then continued that path. But now it's really paying dividends when it comes to my own personal growth.
That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's just that I guess that's maybe the last good point to hit on is that the cool thing about being part of a community is being a part of the community. And
Mhm.
that can be it can be the smallest interaction to the biggest interaction. It doesn't matter. It's just, I mean, even again, liking and subscribing a channel, watching the content, sharing the content. If somebody is also doing something similar to what we're doing, what Art's doing, what some other Subaru person or automotive person is doing, sharing the content that you found, that is contributing to the community. But like interacting, like posting questions, whatever, it doesn't take much to get involved. And just that level of involvement as the
Yeah.
years build can just be so rewarding.
Yeah, and I'm a huge fan of the reciprocation of it. I mean, if you're especially, at a smaller level as a content creator, you should be taking the time to acknowledge those people. I mean, in every video that I do, I thank people for subscribing and following my page because I'm generally thankful that when I post a video and I, wake up the next morning, I have 20 more subscribers and 200 more views, whatever it is. And so then I go straight to the comments and I answer every single one. And the first video I put out about my exit with Grimspeed got like 77,000 views and got
Wow.
into the 400 or 500 comments. I answered every single one. I mean, my eyes were bleeding into midnight. My girlfriend was tugging at my shirt to go to bed, and I just kept answering and answering because I feel like that the reciprocation is owed. Like, you took the
Mm,
time to give me a positive message. You took the time to follow my page to get my subscriber count up, and I should take the time to be able to reciprocate. And I think that that's really cool at a small level. Like, I doubt that Hoonigan is able to do that, or if they are,
right.
they have a team of 30 people that are answering comments around the clock. And
Yeah.
so I just think myself, I'll speak for myself, that I'm in a cool spot where it's just the beginning where I can have that individual interaction. And for you guys, it seems like you're at a level where it's both attainable that you can, and it's also advantageous because ultimately you're building your supporters that not only leave a comment and subscribe, but they'll also go buy some parts from you. Because ultimately, again, that's the best way of supporting a business is you buy stuff. Whether it's
Right.
hard parts from you guys, or if I have like a t-shirt eventually
Yeah.
and you want to buy merch, that's a great way to support. So it starts with a subscribe and it ends with a swipe of your credit card, and both are hugely
Yeah.
appreciated.
It's a really when it works well, it's a really nice balance for everybody involved. That's for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very cool. Well, Art, I want to just thank you again for making the time, being willing to come on and chat about all the stuff that you're doing, and it was a fun conversation for sure. I'm excited to see what the future holds for you. I want to see how these projects come together. And so again, here at the end, just want to say, like if you like what we're doing, like and subscribe to our channel. If you like what Art's doing, like and subscribe to his channel. Definitely head over and check out some of his videos because there's some fun builds, and I think there's going to be only more in store for that. But then go find somebody else. Find somebody else's channel. Like do some exploring of YouTube. Find some other content creators that are doing some stuff that you want to try out or that you're interested in, and like and subscribe them. Get involved with the
Yeah.
community, support the content creators that you like. And man, I think there's some challenges ahead for us all in the automotive community. I mean, that is clear, but we're going to find a way through it. We're still going to find ways to have fun with our cars. That's never going to stop. So just keep helping the community out and help us get through this little transitional patch, and then
Bump in the road.
we'll come out the other end. We'll sooner or later we're going to have flying cars. They've been saying that for I don't know, probably about 100 years now. I think it's going to happen. I think it's going to happen. And boy, can you imagine what we could all do with flying cars?
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Well, John, I appreciate you having me on, and I am looking forward to maybe coming back and talking about some other topics. Maybe we do talk about EV cars. I think that that's such a major thing. We could spend an hour talking about the
oh
future of
yeah,
where all of this is going. I mean, we've grown up with combustion engines, but that is coming to an end. So how that's going to look, your guess is as good as mine. So I think, I really enjoyed my time, and let's do this again sometime. And
yeah,
if you guys have something in the comments that you want me back, you want to talk about a certain thing, I'll hop on the comments here and try and answer the stuff too. So
yeah.
just like you said, John, growing the community, growing the presence, that's the best thing that we could do.
Absolutely. And I'm honestly very curious about electric cars. And I don't know if you've
Mhm.
seen that Subaru just came out with a statement recently that they're actually putting a lot more effort into the EV
Mhm.
options, and they're trying to have more models out in 2 years, 2025.
Yeah.
So it's something that we're
Well,
paying attention to, and I think it's worth a conversation.
I think it's not a coincidence that they took the STI out of the running and only released the 23 WRX. I think the STI is coming back as an EV.
Well, and they said it, but the early rumors that I heard were that it was going to take them until 2030,
Yeah.
and which I think is a mistake. Subaru, if you're listening, if you're in the deep end here, that's a mistake. You've got to get it out
Yeah.
sooner than that.
Mhm.
But I think what they saw with the initial response to the Solterra is that there's a big demand out there for something like that, and now it seems like they're really kind of trying to pivot in that direction. And I hope they do it. I hope they do it well, and I hope they do it quickly because
Yeah.
you can't wait for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years and still expect the same enthusiast base to be willing to kind of move to an all-electric STI by that point. Because,
Exactly.
geez, 2030, again, flying cars. I'm guessing by 2030 we're all going to have flying cars. So cool.
Love it.
Well, thanks again, Art. Thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned to Flatirons Tuning.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Flatiron Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatironstuning.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatiron's Tuning.